meeting now. It is sometimes really humbling to come across some great women, women who are brave by undertaking a variety of tasks. Some tasks are very humble but noble, and other tasks are tasks that will put their life or their liberty in danger. And with this in mind, I'd like to welcome Rhiannon Graham to this meeting. Rhiannon Graham is going to be our first speaker. And before she launches off into her speech, I would like to say that Rhiannon could have avoided the troubles that she faced subsequent to the action that she took. And she could have avoided this on two grounds. Firstly, she could have remained away from the center of Bristol and not participated in the toppling of Colston's statue into the River Avon. And she could also have accepted the offer given by the prosecution to have a magistrate's court trial, which would have resulted, if she was convicted, in a lesser sentence. Instead, she and the other brave comrades who constitute the Colston Four elected a Crown Court trial, and that could have resulted in some severe punishment. Without more ado, I'd like to introduce you to Rhiannon Graham. Rhiannon?
Hiya, thanks, Dennis. Really, really kind words you just said. It's taken me back a little bit. Thank you all. Oh, sorry, Zoom is just telling me things. I'll stop that. So thank you so much for having me here. It really is a privilege and still a very strange thing to be asked to do any public speaking. If you'd asked me a couple of years ago to do any public speaking, I probably would have cried and wanted to fall into a hole. Life has taken some very strange twists and turns. And of course, I think I firstly want to just say also that, you know, I'm such a very small part of that moment that happened in Bristol when the statue was toppled. It was like such a poetic, co-created moment of collective resistance and people coming together to, you know, stand in solidarity against structural racism and police brutality. So I feel like such a really small part of that. But Dennett has asked me to be here today just to tell you a little bit about my background and the journey of sort of how we got to toppling the statue and what happened afterwards. So I'm originally from Norfolk, which is a 97% white population or something like that. So I really grew up in not a very diverse neighborhood. Unfortunately, was surrounded by a lot of casual racism and general discrimination against anybody that was even a little bit different to white, straight and male, really. And I wasn't brought up very political, or I didn't, up until that protest, really, I wouldn't really have considered myself an activist. I wasn't particularly passionate about history in any way, and kind of was doing my own thing in my life. And I've been intrigued about some social movements over time, but never really been very engaged in how the world works in any, what I deem to be any sort of meaningful way. I went to the Arts University of Bournemouth and I studied arts and events management, which isn't necessarily a thing that you need a degree in, but I had a really great time, and that's still the sort of job that I do. So I'm currently in a dressing room in a production warehouse in London, rehearsing for a tour that I'm about to go on. So I do various bits of work within the events industry. So I do a bit of lighting, a bit of stage management, and I also do a bit of rigging, which means I know how to tie knots, and I also have access to rope. I think it's very important when you think about the moment that statue came down. It really exists in this very particular time of obviously the pandemic and the lockdown, and the fact that everybody had had a chance to really take stock and reflect and, get into whatever they wanted to get into, whether it was doing the DIY that they hadn't managed to do, or, researching topics that they hadn't had a chance to. And I think for me, when the news of George Floyd's murder hit the UK, it was really quite a powerful thing for people, in a way that, any other incident like that had happened previously hadn't really hit the same nerve, and of course, or not on the same scale, because obviously, unfortunately, so many people have been subject to police brutality and awful incidents of sort of racial hate. And for some reason, George Floyd really, it just hit a nerve in a different way. And at the same time, I was reading a book, which you might know, called Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, by a woman called Reni Lodge, which is a fantastic book that really sort of lays out the insidious tendrils of structural racism in the UK and how it exists, and kind of gives a bit of an insight, for me as a white person, into like what the Black experience is, especially for if you're Black and British. And at the end of it is really like quite a call to action. And it's funny because someone reminded me of a line within the book where she essentially tells you to get angry, and it is a call to action. And I don't remember those words, but I clearly really felt that. And so within that time, sort of, there's only 2 weeks between George Floyd's murder and the protest in Bristol that took place. And within that time, me and my partner Luke and our friend Lee spent a lot of time looking at different monuments in Bristol. And I really have to give a lot of credit to those two, because they were very passionate about history, politics, and sort of questioning authority. And I think without them and their passion for that, I would never have gotten to the point where I'd want to bring a rope to a protest. And so I really learned a lot in those few weeks, more about sort of the corruption that exists on a grander level in the UK, but also sort of the power hierarchies, particularly in Bristol. And I learned more about who Colston was, and visited the statue, which on the statue, it says that he was one of the most wise and virtuous, it says the statue was erected in honor of one of the most wise and virtuous sons of the city. Which, when you realize that he trafficked 84,000 people, and so many of those people died, and of course, not only did he do that, but campaigned in order to widen out the operations of the transatlantic slave trade from purely just being the Royal Africa Company to then allowing societies like the Society of Merchant Venturers, that still exists in Bristol today. Colston actively campaigned for them to be allowed to run the triangle trade. You really, you get a grim image of how much of an integral part of that story that Colston is. And so starting to learn more about who he is, and then sort of in combination with what I see Bristol to be, because to me, I moved to Bristol because it's this creative city, it's liberal and like multicultural, and it's to me it's like a really lovely city. And it just felt really bizarre that there would be this awful man still, after 125 years, being venerated on this pedestal, literally in the heart of the city centre. And so this idea kind of came about where, I think a lot of people have been thinking about pulling that statue down, or at least having it removed for a very long time. And people have campaigned to have it taken down, and nobody's listened. And yeah, we sort of started to discuss that if you took a rope to the protest, people would probably pull on it. And sorry, I think I've skipped a bit of my notes. Yeah, that's true. As I started to say to Dennett before, is that part of this journey as well was to really understand what white privilege is, because that phrase has come up a lot and has become quite a trending thing, I think, over the past few years. And some people kind of really understand what that is meant to mean. And then I think other people kind of, especially if you're white and you're, you know, of any working class, yeah, if you're white and working class, I think it's hard for some people to accept that their skin color gives them privilege because they don't feel that privilege. But I really felt like it was, I felt almost guilty, to be honest, having never really understood how prevalent racism is in the UK and how intrinsically that is linked to the US and just how deep these tendrils go. And I just felt like at that point that it was my duty as a white person to stand up and stand in solidarity and do something to at least try and rectify some of those wrongs, you know. And it's a big task to try and feel. I feel that's why even now it gets me, you know. It's like it was such a strong feeling of feeling like, you know, so many social contracts have been broken with people of African descent that there's almost no repairing of it, but we have to try and move forward. And so obviously I decided to go to this protest and started thinking about the idea of bringing a rope. And then on the day, my partner was supposed to be with me, and we just had a little bit of an argument the day before, so I hadn't seen him. And I drive down to the protest on my own, having spoken to a few of my friends the night before about it, but sort of quite casually and not with any specific plan. You know, we never decided to meet in a specific place or said, you know, you bring that rope, I'll bring this rope, whatever. And I left my van, I put the rope in my bag, was like, well, okay, yeah, I'm definitely going to take the rope. I don't know if I've got the guts to try and pull this off, but I'm going to put a rope in my bag anyway. And I don't know if any of you were there at the time in Bristol, but it was an incredible feeling, very mixed feelings that day, because obviously we'd all been in lockdown and suddenly thousands of people are just flooding into the city centre. And there's this sort of, mixture of excitement of being out in this big group of people, having not seen anybody. And, you know, there's this like, you know, almost tangible feeling in the air, mixed with, you know, obviously extreme, like quite, like a lot of anger and frustration at such a broken system, and having witnessed, you know, such awful police brutality on the internet, and, you know, a struggle long struggled that shouldn't have to be fought for anymore. And so I went up to the College Green and I watched some really engaging speeches on the Green. And I found my friend Milo, who you may know is one of the other people that was prosecuted. And he said to me, I have a rope in my bag. And I said, that's funny, because so do I. And so we peeled off, the march started through the city centre, and we peeled off towards the plinth. And I think, like I said before, it's a very co-created moment, this, because if we'd have gotten to that statue and no one was paying the attention to it, the march was continuing, it would have been a very different story. But already the focus was there and people were throwing eggs at it, and there was a placard that said Colston must fall. So this was really this was the mood of the day. And obviously we got ropes out and tied them into knots, and people were already on the statue. And I think the whole affair took about 2.5 minutes from us getting ropes out to it being on the ground. And although that moment didn't cure racism, it didn't, you know, it didn't sort of make up for so many years of hurt and pain. It did feel like a little victory. I feel like it just in the air that day, as soon as that statue fell, people ran in, and this whole sort of almost ritual thing kind of started with people kneeling on his neck and spraying on him and doing all sorts of things, and then obviously being rolled to the river, which, by the way, I had no part in. I was already at the Castle Park, and me and my partner said, wouldn't it be really poetic if they put him in the harbour? Because obviously, you know, so many people who were enslaved, of course, would have been thrown overboard en route, which is just awful. And so it's, you know, it's very fitting that Colston end up at the bottom of the harbour in Bristol. And obviously we looked online and that had happened. They pushed him like 1/2 mile or something all the way to the harbour. And yeah, it's after that, I think there was just this insane ripple effect that myself and the others were just not prepared for. It obviously hit international news. People started pulling down other statues that of colonial figures, and you know, some of which have been contested for a long time. Others were, you know, a symbol of oppression, which, at whatever reason people did it for. It started happening, I think, 33 Columbus statues in America have come down. Last time I looked, that was the amount. So it really, on one side, hit this nerve of, you know, people who are either activists or are oppressed and feel the need to like challenge authority or whatever way. It was really like this, oh, okay, this is what we're doing. And on the other side, the British establishment, we really hit a nerve with them too, but in a very different way, where it was suddenly the very fabric of Britain and what, you know, to them what it means to be British, was suddenly being attacked. And I'd like to make the point that I like to try and find things to be proud about being British for. And that's nothing to do with this, like the St. George's flag. It's nothing to do with the empire. It's really to do with people that have challenged those things and the sort of melting pot of culture that Britain is. I think there are so many things to be proud of. It's just not what the British establishment generally are proud of, I think. And of course, we then witnessed them have these knee-jerk reactions of, obviously they called us thugs and criminals and called us all sorts of other names. They wrote in a law into the police crime and sentencing bill to say that if you pull down a statue, you would get 10 years in prison, which is unreal. I think at the moment, the maximum you can get for rape is 5 years. So you really sort of start to get a sense of where our Tory government's priorities are, I think, through that. There was also this quite concerning rhetoric that started up about anti-wokeism, which, you know, just is flawed in so many ways, I think, because I actually did a little bit of research into where the term woke came from. And woke was first used in as far back as the 1940s, I think. It was used in the African-American civil rights movement. I think it was used in a play or something in the 40s, and then used a lot more in the 70s, and then started to be used again more when BLM started. I think it was around 2015, when sadly another young lad was shot by a policeman, and that was this moment that really triggered the BLM movement. And of course, as you know, as usually happens, this term that was born out of resistance and, you know, being aware of social issues, is then appropriated by the other side to essentially damn young people for being engaged in politics and caring about social justice. But I'd like to think that it's a feeble attempt to try and dampen the spirits of people that are, you know, pushing forward for positive social change. And we also witnessed quite a lot of so many creative responses out of after the statue was toppled. Sorry, lost my train of thought. So yeah, anyway, I'll move on to the legal side of things. So of course, after the statue was toppled, obviously they released all these photos looking for people. I was #1 on Crime Watch for a day, which until they realized that there was far more evil people in the world to try and find, so they took me off the top spot. And eventually I was actually at my brother's house when they tried to arrest me, and of course, you know, the police played their usual sort of games with that. Milo agreed to voluntarily attend an interview, which he organised with the police. And then the police cancelled it and reorganised it. And then they turned up at 7:30 in the morning, raided his van, raided his workshop, put him in a cell for 6 hours and confiscated all of his stuff. So, you know, suddenly having, you know, gone from this person that's not particularly an activist or very politically engaged, suddenly really starting to understand how the police operate, how the establishment operates. Really, yeah, it was quite a crash course into activism. Kind of chucked myself fully in the deep end. But I think the main thing is that I never ever felt that action was not justified and that I was a criminal. And that really held fast like through the whole journey, because, you know, like how Dennett introduced me was obviously at the beginning, we weren't offered a caution because they clearly saw that we brought ropes, so they cautioned some people and decided to prosecute us. And we went to you always have your first hearing in the magistrates, and so we all collectively decided to stick with our guns and go to the magistrates and plead not guilty, because, you know, we fully believed that we were just in our actions, and that in us pulling down the statue was far less of a crime than it was to leave that statue of a man who, like, you know, enacted so much harm upon people. To leave him venerated was so much more of a crime than to pull him down, particularly because that statue has been contested since the 1920s. And bearing in mind, it was put up in 1895. So it had around 25 years-ish of not being contested. No one really wanted to put it there in the first place. And, you know, at that point, I think I said this in court, is like, how long must you wait to be listened to? You know, because some people are like, oh, you're undermining the rule of law, and you need to wait for the democratic process to work. And in this particular case, I believe democracy had already been undermined, because the Society of Merchant Venturers, who Colston was a part of, who are still active in Bristol today, still have a lot of influence, a lot of power, a lot of money. When a few years ago, there was a plaque suggested to go replace the plaque that's on the plinth of Edward Colston, to better contextualize him, give more information really about who he was. And eventually, the Society of Merchant Venturers had intervened so much and had whispered in the ears of the council so much that the mayor just wrote it off and decided that he wasn't doing that. And so it never got better contextualized. It never got a better plaque. When you've got a small group of unelected, like an undemocratic body of people who are so easily pulling the strings in a city, surely democracy has already failed. So that was part of our reasoning and our defense. Also the fact that so many people had said for so long that the statue should come down, and the council hadn't listened. And we were very, very lucky in that. So within the context of protest cases and law, what you ideally want is the judge to allow the jury to decide whether it's proportionate to convict based on you using your human rights. So in this case, obviously, we used our rights. Sorry, have I been talking for too long?
No, I could, and I'm sure a lot of us would like to listen to you for several hours.
No, I could see Dennett sort of like, and then I thought, oh, hang on.
No, I wanted to find an opportune time to say that because of the time limits that we have, and I'm sure there would be people wanting to put some questions to you, could you stop at this point?
Yeah, I can stop.
If you wish, take about 5 minutes of questions. I've already seen one from Dr. Cassandra. I don't know if you've seen it on your screen. She asks 2 questions. Do you think you would have been successful at trial had you been a person of African origin? What are your thoughts about this? And then she goes on to say, will you be joining the 1st of August reparations march from Brixton to Parliament? So if you could answer that, and if there are any other people with questions, if Omar, put it in the chat or raise their hands.
Sorry to just come in. If anybody does have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or use the raise your hand function, just like so, and we'll come to you. If you don't want to ask any questions on camera, just address it to one of our co-hosts and we'll get around to asking it for you on your behalf.
Yes, Rian, that was, to me, fascinating, brilliant. And if there are any opportunities that you know where you will be speaking for longer on this issue, please let us know so we can tell people. The first question that you have from Dr. Cassandra, if you were of African descent, what do you think would have happened to you?
It's an interesting question, because I've had this conversation with a few people, because I think, from one side, based on the historic treatment of African people in the police system, the justice system, you might think that I would be less likely to get away with it, less likely to be acquitted. However, I think if the trial were to go exactly as it did, I think it would be even harder to convict me if I was of African descent, because particularly when you hear, obviously we had Professor David Olusoga, who you might know from doing BBC documentaries and working for The Guardian, He came and spoke, was one of our witnesses. And the judge actually allowed him, which we didn't think he'd do. He allowed David to essentially stand in the stand for 2 hours and basically give a lecture on slavery. And you could, he went into some quite shocking detail, and you could really see the jury absorbing all this information. And based on all that information and the context of the BLM march, and I don't think personally, if I was on that jury, I would have been able to convict someone of African heritage. I probably am a bit biased, but yeah, it's an interesting one of different perspectives there.
Okay. Any further questions, Omar?
I haven't seen any hands raised so far.
I would like to join the reparations march. I don't know if I will be here because I'm touring, but if I am, I will.
Okay, if we're present, then please join CLS. We've got a very large and spanking new banner. So see you there, hopefully.
Yeah, we've got some
next person is Raphael. Raphael, if you could be so kind as to be quick. Unmute yourself, Raphael. Okay, I can't. Raphael, yes.
Sorry about it. I'm back.
Yeah.
Yes, very quick question regarding the situation in Bristol. What people don't know is Bristol was one of the principal slave importing and exporting cities of the trade in the country. And Colston and the merchant ventures were the principal people behind it. The erection of the statue was always controversial, especially supporting Colston. So I'm surprised that the people in Bristol wanted the statue erected in the first place, because it was very hard for them to do it. So what I don't understand is that when your people took the action of removing the statue, why didn't the city take action to say, okay, what we're gonna do is do something, put something else there instead? Has that ever been raised with the city?
Okay, before you answer, Rian, can I take Ngoma and then Luke Daniels? And if you could answer them in rotation. Ngoma?
Yes, thank you all very, very much. Ariana, thank you very much for your contribution up to this point. Mindful of the time constraints, I'm going to be very brief, which is not particularly like me. Like a number of people in this meeting, I'm currently involved with the campaign in Harlesden. You might be familiar with the area Harlesden and its demographics, and you may or may not be aware that there are two schools, or twin schools, named after Leopold, and a road called Leopold Road. There are in fact several Leopold Roads in London, and I'm not sure about elsewhere in Britain, but I'm quite sure that there is. Long story short, we're experiencing a great deal of opposition particularly from the governors of that twin school, and also from the local authority. At some point last year, I did make an attempt to get some advice or assistance from the Bristol heroes, but obviously you were at that time engaged in a lot of other stuff. What I want to know is, without taking up any more of the meeting's time, would it be possible for us to have some arrangement now whereby we can have a chat about how you might be able to assist or give us the benefit of your experience at a more convenient time? Because I don't expect us to discuss the issue now. I know there are a lot of other outstanding things and questions that people want to pose. And again, thank you in advance for any assistance that you will be able to offer.
Thanks, Ngoma. Luke? Luke?
Unmute. Yes, I did. Let me unmute myself. I wanted to really, first of all, say a real big thank you to Rihanna. I think, Rihanna, it's just been a very honest, frank, good discussion that you've started here in some ways. Some of the issues that come up is what role should white people be playing in terms of, reparatory justice. And I wanted to congratulate you really for the stand that you took and some of your friends in standing up in such a big way. One of the things you mentioned at some point was about feeling a bit guilty about something. And, you know, for me, coming from a perspective of working for change, I think I always say to people, you know, guilt is a wasted emotion. So you need to just push that one away and just get on with what you're doing, as it were. And I think we look forward to maybe working with you in the future. And because we've got a big campaign to work here, so I hope you will be up to doing some work with CLS when we start to really roll out our campaign for reparations for slavery in the UK. So yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Rhiannon, if you could answer those questions and respond to Luke's comments. And if Kofi, Brother Tete, you can hear us, be prepared to come in. So Rhiannon, over to you.
In terms of putting new things on the statue, there actually was a series of things that popped up on the statue afterwards. So there was an interesting one that popped up, which was a mannequin dressed like Jimmy Savile, which is obviously awful, but perfectly illustrates the point that no amount of philanthropy can account for, you know, can outweigh that amount of human suffering. And there's various things that have popped up on the plinth that I think they're still debating whether to use it as like a soapbox kind of plinth that people can get on to do speeches from, or whether to use it as a revolving art platform, or whether to just get rid of it entirely. So that is a discussion that is sort of happening within the council, but then obviously artists are just being their rago selves and putting stuff on the plinth anyway, which I like. I apologize, I can't remember the name of the second person. Ngoma, thank you. Absolutely, please take my details. I'd be very happy to chat to you. I mean, I don't know how much I can help, but I'm very happy to share my experiences with you for what they're worth.
I'll pass on the details, Rhiannon.
Yeah, thank you, David.
Okay.
Appreciated.
Okay, no problem. And to Luke, yes, I'd love to work with you all in whatever capacity I can. I think you're right. I wanted to honestly convey what I felt at that time. And I think it did come out of this feeling like I should have known more before. And, you know, accepting that and moving forward with that, and just, you know, committing to learning more and being more active. I think now, on a personal level, this has done wonders for my confidence and my agency. It's an incredibly surreal thing to be asked to talk at a meeting like this. So I'm really trying to use this experience to keep that ball rolling for social movements and for my own personal projects. But yes, if I can be of any help, and also to learn about reparations, I really want to learn about more about reparatory justice. So yes, please do keep in touch. It's been really, really lovely to be here. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Thank you so much, Rhiannon. The comments on the chat are all singing praises and thanking you for speaking. Please stay as long as you can. We know that the arts industry is recovering from COVID, and you're going to be under a lot of pressure now. We're going to have from Ghana, Brother Mark Tete, who's been on the phone to me to say that he's ready to speak. If you can stay, that would be fantastic. If you have to shoot off, we understand, and we hope to see you in the future. Oh, by the way, there was a move that one of the black sections of a major union has agreed to move its annual general meeting from London to Bristol. I believe that you have not been informed, but I've been assured that once they formally agreed it, then they will inform you and liaise with you and the other comrades of the Colston 4. So thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Okay, we move next, if we can, to Brother Mark Kofi Tete, who is a historian a guide at the Cape Coast dungeons, over which Cape Coast Castle sits, and hopefully the technical difficulties that he may have experienced will now have been solved. Kofi, can you hear us? Any news, Omar?
I haven't heard anything just yet.
Okay.
It's unmuted and we can see him, but I'm not sure about the audio. Give me 2 seconds.
Well, what we're seeing from Ghana is a live stream, apparently, of Cape Coast Castle, beneath which are dungeons capable of holding up to 2,000 people. And I'll try and ask Brother Kofi Tete to be ready to speak. He had said he was ready to speak next. Oh, there's some movement. I can see some movement on the screen. Kofi, can you hear us? Can you hear us? What I propose is that we've got 2 other speakers, and whilst either of those speakers are delivering their presentation, I will ring Kofi and ask what the problem is. Who wants to go next, Steve or Luke?
I'll go next if you like.
Okay, Steve. Our next speaker is Steve Cushion, Dr. Steve Cushion, who has written an excellent book called Sir Robert Jeffrey and the Business of Slavery. Now, I won't say much about this book, except it's probably one of the most successful publications by Caribbean Labour Solidarity. If you'd just like to say briefly who you are, Steve, and what you are intending to talk about, and fire away. Over to you.
Okay, yeah, Steve Cushion. I'm a retired university lecturer. I'm until recently branch secretary of the University and College Union London Retired Members Branch, and I'm on the executive of Caribbean Labour Solidarity, and I am also on the newly formed London East and South East Region TUC Reparations for African Enslavement Steering Group. So, for those of you who don't know, there's this statue of a slave trader outside the Museum of the Home in Hackney, this Sir Robert Jeffrey. Now, to me, the overwhelming majority of statues raise issues about class, gender and race, as they usually portray members of the ruling class of the time. Now, given the importance of the profits made from slavery, the trafficking and trafficking in the rise of British capitalism, it's inevitable that a very large number of statues will be memorials to businessmen who made their fortunes in the business of slavery. Now, the government is calling for a policy of retain and explain. Now, that sounds reasonable at first sight, but it depends on who writes the explanation and what size it is. So a placard of the same size as the statue, inscribed with, "This is a statue of Sir Robert Jeffrey who made his money by a crime against humanity," might be acceptable. But the assessment in a hagiography published by the Jeffrey Museum as recently as 2013 says with sickening contempt for the victims of enslavement, "The monarch, ministers of state, merchants, politicians and lawyers respected his honesty, integrity, fairness and faith." Well, that won't do. The Royal African Company was set up by King Charles II in 1672 with his brother James, Duke of York, who's the future James II, who as governor of the company and its largest shareholder. Robert Jeffrey was one of the original 200 investors, investing £400 out of the original subscription of £111,000. Now, £400 would be worth about £1.5 million in today's money. The Royal African Company shipped more enslaved African women, children and men to the Americas than any other single institution during the entire period of the transatlantic slave trade. Jeffrey himself also helped finance 2 slave trafficking voyages by the China Merchant, a ship of which he was part owner. The Royal African Company acted as a get-rich-quick racket for the Stuart royal family, Charles II and James II, along with their cronies and backers from the City of London, among whom, of course, we do find Sir Robert Jeffrey. We also find amongst the directors of the Royal African Company one Tobias Rustat, who has recently been the subject of an attempt by the Master of Jesus College, Cambridge, to have his memorial removed from the college chapel. In defending the memorial, Professor Lawrence Goldman suggested that in trying to cancel, as he put it, Rustat, the college was attempting to assault carefully selected aspects of its past, and that this could lead to further calls for the removal of memorials from other historical figures elsewhere. Other figures from the past, equally bad or even worse, will have to be removed and cancelled. And he's right. So be it. Let's get rid of them. There is a statue of James II in front of the National Gallery in Trafalgar Square, depicting him as a Roman emperor wearing Roman armour and a laurel wreath. A statue of Charles II stands in front of the Royal Hospital in Chelsea, also dressed as a Roman soldier. Given that the last person who dressed in this fashion left Britain in 410 AD, what's all this about? I would argue that larger than life statues on 10 feet high plinths exist to reinforce the power, legitimacy and authority of the ruling elite. They are part of a project to say that the current ruling class are thereby right, that the imperialist past of this country is somehow honourable. As such, they really are part of a whole ideological offensive. They whitewash the past of the subjects they represent. Few in England speak of Lord Nelson's support for enslavement and trafficking. Yet this is common knowledge in the Caribbean, where his statue was ceremoniously removed from public display in Bridgetown, Barbados, as part of the celebrations of the proclamation of their republic earlier this year. The role of the Royal Navy in suppressing the slave trade after 1807 is much praised. Little is said about the role of the Royal Navy in promoting the traffic of enslaved Africans in the 200 years before. Without the power of the warships of the Royal Navy, foreign powers and pirates would have wreaked havoc with the slave trade. Racism, which the profiteers of the business of slavery used as a justification for enslavement, has systematically infected British society. The racism of the police, stop and search, the unemployment figures for young black people, the endless discrimination and petty humiliations of everyday life, the Windrush scandal. All these and more have their origins in the wealth and power that the British ruling class gained from slavery. Profits from British trafficking and the unpaid labour of enslaved workers contributed significantly to the accumulation of capital in England. This helped finance the Industrial Revolution and conversely contributed to the underdevelopment of member states of the Caribbean community, both through the profits made from sugar and other tropical products, as well as the supply of cheap raw materials such as cotton to European and North American manufacturers. These profits went directly or indirectly to the manufacturers and other suppliers of the trafficking, to the shipping industry, into the construction of infrastructure such as canals and railways, but above all to the financial services industry. Many of today's banks and insurance companies can be traced back directly to the concerns that had their first growth through their financing of trafficking and enslavement. It would therefore seem reasonable that these modern corporations should refund the unpaid wages from which their predecessors profited so handsomely. I've done a calculation for the amount of unpaid wages owed just in the case of Barbados. Using the available figures for the number of enslaved workers between 1627 and 1838, calculating the average number for each period under consideration, then multiplying this figure by the number of years in that period, and also multiplying by £15, which was the average wage of a British agricultural worker in the period of 1650 to 1780, or by £25, which was the average for the period 1780 to 1850. This gives a total of unpaid wages of 211 million £113,465. In today's money, that would amount to around £500 billion sterling. A similar calculation for the whole of the British Caribbean, the old British West Indies, produces an unpaid wages bill of £1,500 billion. As I see it, the descendants of the enslaved are saying it's our money and we want it back. So the London East and South East region of the British Trade Union Congress has set up a reparation for African enslavement steering group to campaign in the trade union movement for reparations for enslavement. Because as well as the return of unpaid wages, we're seeking reparations for the former enslaved Africans and their descendants for the denial of their culture and history, human rights abuses, murder, rape, flogging, branding, denial of freedom of movement, freedom to own land, and the right to education. Perhaps removing the statue of Robert Jeffrey could be part of that process of the reparation of slavery. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Steve. Again, another fantastic presentation. And just to repeat, Omar has detailed on the chat where copies of the book can be obtained, which is Sir Robert Jeffrey and the Business of Slavery by our very own Steve Cushion. Now, Steve, I have read many times your presentation on the that you delivered to the Hackney Stand Up to Racism. It's a document like this, which is a very short but very interesting read. Are you able to put a copy of it on the chat?
Possibly.
Okay, if you wish, I haven't asked
I'll
you
do that.
before.
I'll do that after we've finished.
Okay.
I need to fiddle about.
Right, I will go straight on to Kofi Tete, who was having some problems with his mic. Before I do that, I'll just say to people, I've put details on the chat as to how people can join CLS. We're a very small organization, so we need everyone to give us as much support as they can. Now, Brother Tete, if you can hear us, could you please announce yourself? It looks like we've got... This is really a pity because I know that Kofi has spent a lot of time on his presentation.
Does he need to unmute? He seems to be muted.
I can't...
You can't.
I can't see him.
Right, there is now someone called user Coffee Tete in the corner that is muted. Perhaps.
Okay. Coffee, if you can please hear us, unmute yourself. Right. Kofi, can you hear us? Okay. I'm going to try a workaround, folks, which is if I can get Kofi on the phone and broadcast him through my mic whilst he does his delivery. So if you go to the pin, if you can pin Kofi as your speaker, I will contact him now. I may have muted myself for a few seconds. Could you bear with me? Anyone who has
Yeah, sure. We've actually got a question if you want me to have that asked.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I'll be on mute for a second.
Sure, no problem. So a statement and a question from one of our attendees. They've said, I have a problem in part around the matter of the removing of the evidence of Britain's part in the transatlantic slave trade. Whilst it is seen as a social move away from Britain's colonialist past, I cannot help but think that their absolute removal is a means to hide, bury, and rewrite the evils done. I wonder if some opinion and clarity can be provided. This question is to any of the speakers.
Well, if you want me to say something on that.
Yeah, sure, Steve.
I think that if we look around at so many of the statues, we could get rid of half of them and it'd still be enough. I've just read a report from Wales of the number of statues and memorials and so on that there are there. But as I say, I think the argument needs to be about, okay, if you want to put an explanation up, it depends what that explanation is that's important. I think from what Rhiannon was saying and from what I've read about the situation in Bristol, had there been something that really denounced Colston put up in large letters beneath it, then I think, you know, he'd probably still be there today. The problem is that when you get some mealy-mouthed sort of apology, well, he did a few bad things, but he also did a few good, balanced sort of thing. Well, that's not good enough. And one thing I did notice, and where whoever asked that question is absolutely correct, I noticed that the statue of Hans Sloane, who was a slave trader who gave some money and some artifacts to the British Museum, was very, very quickly got rid of, because, of course, practically everything in the British Museum is looted from our, from this country's colonial past. And so, just as you say, getting rid of it and burying it is is no good. You know, it has to be. We have to do it in such a manner that the proper discussion can be had. And if that means leaving Robert Jeffrey there, but with his face painted red, then or whatever. I think, but it's now started a discussion that's important. And the real importance isn't about the statue. The importance of the discussion is about racism. The importance of the discussion is about the colonial past of this country and who profited from it.
Steve. I think Dennett's back. Dennett, you're muted at the moment.
I'm going to try this workaround. Yep. I'll ask people to go to the user Kofi Tete screen, and if they want, they can pin it so that it becomes large. The picture quality isn't great. Oh, for goodness sake! Kofi has agreed to speak through the phone, and hopefully we can keep that link going. And hopefully you can hear. Brother Kofi, could you just do 1, 2, 3 through the phone? And can I ask, say, Omar, what the quality of the sound is like? When you're ready, Kofi.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Can you hear?
I'm ready.
Okay.
Yeah,
I can hear you.
Omar, can
maybe
you hear?
Maybe you want to turn down the audio just a tiny bit. Just so it's not crackling.
Okay, 1 second.
Just on the phone, not your actual.
Yeah. Okay, Kofi, fire away again. Just introduce yourself again.
All right. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Okay.
Okay. We're going to try and persevere. Everybody, thank you very much for staying with us. Kofi Tete is a graduate of the University of Cape Coast and has been a lecturer and guide at the Cape Coast Castle. Cape Coast Castle is almost the largest of the kidnapping centers during the kidnapping spree. But it is definitely got the largest dungeons. And Kofi will take us through his presentation now. So bear with us and we'll try and maintain the link. Brother Kofi, could you start, please?
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. people listening all around the globe. We will start by saying that Africans are the...
Sorry to stop you, Kofi, but could you turn down the sound on your computer? We're getting feedback.
Is it okay now?
Yes.
Hello, is it okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I am saying that Africans are the backbone of the white civilization. And we are also the backbone of European success and wealth. And before the arrival of the Europeans, there were no organized geopolitical boundaries. We had kingdoms, empires, and African states, which were ruled by kings and queens and royals. And because of that, they have different cultures, which was based on respect, values, and mutual relationship. But European culture is based on products, privilege, and power. And if we talk about the brief history, the summary of how the Africans were kidnapped. That is the topic I'm dealing with now. During the time of the transatlantic slave trade, Europeans used several means to get their ancestors. One, they captured some physically. They worked or connived with some Africans to capture other Africans. Some other Africans called slave raiders. Europeans armed them against other Africans. So they were going raiding, kidnapping some Africans, bringing them to the Europeans in exchange for foreign goods that they gave them. The last one that brought majority was ethnic conflict. And we have to also understand that before the coming of the Europeans to Africa, because there were no geopolitical boundaries, we were limited to kingdoms and tribes. Therefore, the kingdoms ruled themselves. They were independent states and kingdoms. They fight each other over boundary just to expand their territory in their kingdoms. However, whenever they go to war at that time, the losers were taken as domestic slaves. They came to stay with the royals at home. They were not kept in dungeons. They were not taken to Europe and America. They were not raped. Their names were not changed. And when Europeans got to our land, the situation changed. They quickly capitalized on our system. So they brought guns which were more powerful than the bows and arrows that our ancestors were using to expand their kingdoms. This was given to the African chiefs. The leaders at the time, and they were to pay. The guns to fight each other, take their everything. The guns get to the chiefs who are leaders. They would then organize their people, use their weapons against the other tribes. So at the end of the day, the losers, instead of them to become domestic slaves in their homes as they were doing before, those were given out to the Europeans in exchange for foreign goods. So this was one of the major ways of getting the people. If you look at what happened 500 years ago, what is happening globally in terms of conflicts, to me as a professional tour guide, I think the system hasn't changed much. The system is still working to the advantage of the one who has more weapons. Secondly, how they were able to turn the African community against each other in terms of trade, because they brought foreign goods and foreign materials. The locals at that time became crazy, or they came to love European goods. So, and they used the goods to entice the African chiefs. So whenever they gave them the goods, they were to exchange for other money, but there was no money. So the goods were exchanged for captives who came out as a result of the conflicts. So that's basically what happened during the time of the trade. And the transatlantic slave trade. After Africans walking several miles from their villages and their cottages to the dungeons, they were held in underground dungeon, which is about 10 to 15 feet underground, where they had no light, no ventilation. They didn't provide anything with sanitary. They go to toilets on the floor. That was the same place they slept for about 3 months. They were not coming out. So diseases and infections broke out. Millions died in the dungeons because at that time Europeans were not even cleaning the dungeons. So the waste piled to some level like a cow dung. So if you enter the dungeons in Cape Coast Castle today, in the male dungeon, you wouldn't see the original floor that the British constructed. You see a solidified waste that piled as a result of the maltreatment of our ancestors. So when they're ready to go, they were chained together in shackles, weak, hungry. They marched them through a passage from the male dungeon. They were not even allowed to come out. They walked through a passage. They didn't see sunlight or moonlight, no ventilation. They walked through a tunnel of about 78 meters through the door they call the door of no return. If you get through the door of no return, it means you say bye-bye to Africa. You lose your identity, you lose your culture, you lose your respect, dignity, and everything. And from the door of no return, Cape Coast dungeons, I see Africans scattered all over the globe. Some from this castle, they were taken to United Kingdom, precisely Liverpool, Bristol. Others went to the Caribbean, North America, and other places. And the last one, you talk about the effect on the African continent as a result of the transatlantic slave trade for a period of 400 years. If you want to talk about the effect, it will take me days to discuss this with you, but because of the time, I'm just going to summarize everything. It brought a mass population lost to the African continent, the loss of human and natural resources that retarded the growth of African continent, and it has changed the destiny of the African people, because the direction at which the continent was moving at that time with their culture and everything. And when Europeans came in, they changed the whole thing. They imposed a foreign culture on African people. So now Africa, in a way, we are losing our culture because of the transatlantic slave trade. And then part of our problems in Africa is due to because of the transatlantic slave trade. Because for 400 years, if our ancestors were lazy at all, I think they would have done something for us to come and continue today. But for 400 years, they were only interested in taking able men and women with the knowledge, the strength to develop the continent of Africa, to Americas and Caribbean, to go and develop those places. And today, America and Europe, they are richer than Africans because of 400 years that our people were to work. They were denied staying on the continent to work. approached to go and work in other places. So in my conclusion, Europeans and Americans must realize that if they hadn't come, Africa would have been better than what it is today. Because they came, they changed our destiny, they enslaved us for 400 years. They retarded our growth, and today we are where we are now. And they keep on dictating to African people, manipulating African leaders. Anybody who wants to rise and make Africa better, sometimes they team up together, they eliminate that leader. So Africans around the globe must come together with a common identity, common goal, and fight for the betterment of African continent. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kofi. I hope you can stay on the phone, and we'll attempt to overcome this technical difficulty. Well, folks, before we move on to the next speaker, we've got attendees from Jamaica, Canada, and obviously from Ghana. And Kofi's exposition is really, really good. I can hear it better than perhaps most of you. I would suggest maybe that we will, whilst he's on the phone, try and put some questions to Kofi. So if you can get your questions ready or raise your hand. Kofi, please don't switch on. Do not switch on the sound on your laptop. And what I will say is that one of the problems faced by people such as Kofi, who are not paid a considerable amount of money, in fact, the payment is really disappointing, is that they have to use the technology that they have. Now, whilst we were arranging this talk, Kofi had indicated that the work that he is doing in providing education to Ghanaians and visitors to Ghana about the kidnapping of Africans has been rendered very difficult because his computer laptops has broken down. I don't know which one he's using now. I don't think it's the one that he was talking about. And so there is an appeal that he's making to you. Please, if you've got any ability to supply a laptop or contribute to a laptop for Kofi, please contact us at CLS. We already have some offers made before this meeting. So I will suggest that we have questions to Kofi. My first question, though, or the first question is, Kofi, behind you is a picture of a building. Could you tell the attendees what that building is?
This building is the center of the British transatlantic slave trade called Cape Coast Castle, but we call it a dungeon because captives were held here.
Okay, and how many captives could be held at any one time?
This dungeons could hold as much as about 1,500 captives at a given time. Sometimes it even exceeded that number.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I see the first question is from Michael Boateng. Michael, could you state your question? And let me know if you can hear through the phone, Kofi.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, Michael.
So thank you very much for providing that very informative talk. Unfortunately, like they're not seem to have asked my question already, which is a bit aggravating. So I have to come up with another one, I suppose, so to speak. So like during the process of the slave trade, of course, in order to, assemble all those people, put them in, dungeons and so on and so forth, there has to be a group of people who are, on board with that whole affair. And those group of people you know, Africans themselves. So like I suppose my question is to what degree was like the entirety of the slave trade dependent on, you know, regional conflicts, or like, you know, things like you know, what do you call it, the sort of you know, defeated members of other tribes and things like that. How much of that went into it, and how much of that went into, you know, I don't know if I'm coming across very clear, but like I suppose you're getting the idea. How much of that was the result of like regional conflicts in the area, and what happened as a result afterwards, I guess. I don't know if that's clear.
Okay. Did you get the question, Kofi?
No, if you can make it brief for me.
Okay, to what extent was the kidnapping of Africans dependent upon conflicts that preceded, if you like, the capture of these Africans? Or was the capture of the Africans a part of the enslavement process? In other words, was there a, which came first, if anything came first?
Which one and which and which? Which one and which one?
Was there conflicts between the various kingdoms, tribes, and empires that led to the kidnapping of Africans by Europeans? Or was it the other way around, that these conflicts were inspired by European traders?
Okay, thank you very much. Before Europeans even came, Africans fought each other to expand their kingdoms and empire, because that time could empire forming and empire breaking. So there were a lot of small conflicts among the African people, even before Europeans came. But when Europeans came, they capitalized on that system because they realized that there was conflict in the system between the kingdoms and then the tribes. So they simply capitalized on that system, and they supplied weapons to the chiefs who were ruling to fight each other the more. Because at that time, before Europeans came, our ancestors, the conflicts that they fought with bows and arrows. So when Europeans came, when they realized there was conflict already, they brought weapons to replace the bows and arrows at that time. And they would tell them that they needed weapons to protect themselves, they needed weapons to fight each other, take their everything. And so by so they created division among the people. So there was conflict before Europeans came. But the degree was not as Europeans arrived. When Europeans came, it was intensified because weapons of destruction, weapons that could destroy things were brought. But that's what we used before Europeans came. Arrow could not destroy anything, but the guns that they brought were more destructive. So that made more smaller tribes and kingdoms became vulnerable to the bigger tribes and kingdoms.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much. I will proceed and ask Luke, our president, to unmute and be ready to speak. May I suggest, Brother Kofi, in addition to a great thanks for the effort that I know you have done, for example, I know that you've had to give up work today, switch back on your sound on your computer, and I'll temporarily switch this off. And if any questions come through later on, we can deal with it. Luke, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, sorry about the technical glitch, brothers and sisters. Before you start, Luke, just a quick heads up. A number of people have put on the chat the use of words. Now, words are vitally, vitally important. So Dr. Cassandra has said she's quite happy that Kofi has used the word dungeon rather than castle, because as you know, castle is a fairy tale term which denotes peace, calm, and tranquility. Other words that are being used now to describe the process, instead of enslavement, the word kidnapping is used. Instead of the middle passage, the word human trafficking is being used. Instead of plantation, with its gone with the wind connotations, the word work camp is being used. I've even heard James O'Brien of LBC use the word concentration camp. So using these harsher words is important to bring across the strength of what has taken place. So Luke, sorry to do that little bit of clarification. Yeah. If you could fire away, please.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Dennis. And I think thanks to Kofi as well, and especially for sharing that picture, which brought back some memories and feelings too, because you cannot go to that dungeon and not be touched by it. The door of no return. So yes, thanks very much for that presentation, and all the way from Ghana. Now, the bit I've been asked to speak about it, the more I thought about it, the more I wondered who came up with this title. I can't remember if I did. And partly I wanted to say maybe it was you, Dana, that has put me in this fix in talking about what is the consequences, as it were, of fighting for reparations. A very big topic, and I've changed my mind so many times about it in trying to do this presentation, and as I told myself, it seemed to blow my mind in some ways, just about thinking about the significance of what we're doing. And it seems to me that in some way the fight for reparations, the fight almost to change the world. You know, we're taking on 500 years of indoctrination about slavery and the whole ideology of slavery. And we're also, if we're gonna actually defeat it, we're also having to take on the whole capitalist and imperialist system that helped put it in place. So for me, it became a huge thing to just think about what we're doing. But at the same time, I was very excited about it because it opened the door for so many other things that and that we engage with in actually trying to get to the end product, which is reparations, being paid for the slavery. We heard some of the calculations from Steve. I won't look at that aspect of it and I just wanted to give really a feeling about what it means to be fighting for reparations, what the task is, what it will entail, how it will affect the world. And I think it affects us wherever we are, the whole question of slavery and racism, because at the end of it, you know, that's what it is. We're looking at racism, we're looking at internalized racism. For us in the Caribbean, the challenge for us is to be able to take on that issue of the internalized racism. By internalized racism, I mean the false messages, the lies that they've told about Africans, the misinformation we've had to endure for all that time about Africans. And many people have taken those negative stories and propaganda really about Africans on board, and they've what we call internalized it. How we see that acted out in the Caribbean is the whole idea about colorism, which is another oppression that really is happening in the Caribbean. You know, the lighter skinned you are, the most likely you are to be favored or favorable, and certainly under colonialism. So we're tackling not only the effects of slavery, but also the effects of the colonialism for over 500 years, how it's mashed up our communities and our people. And part of the reparations is about healing that whole process. Of course, money makes a difference. We need the resources in there to tackle, many of the social problems that the whole slavery and colonialism has created for us. And where do we start? I try to look at it in some ways in a personal way, but we have also got to look at it in a systemic way, because those issues are there and with us all of the time. In a personal way, just to bring it to light, I am conscious of the effects of the slavery and colonialism by the remittances that I often have to send to, Guyana, where I'm from, for either friends or family who are struggling with the poverty, with the endemic poverty that our societies have been left with as a result of the exploitation that has gone on for so long. My grandmother had an amputation, had a foot amputated because of diabetes. And then just recently, what would have been her great grandchild had her toes amputated because of diabetes. And we know that, part of the campaign is about having enough resources to build a proper health service that can take care of people. So we need these monies going in and to dealing with those issues. It affects us in that kind of way. Now in the region we have one of the most violent societies in the world. The murder rate in Jamaica and other countries is very, very high per capita. The brutalization of slavery has left us with patterns of behavior that is seriously affecting our social lives and the way we are with each other in the region. Domestic violence, another red area for the Caribbean. Most of the Caribbean countries are put in a red bracket of domestic violence. All of this can be attributed to the effects and the brutalization of slavery. One of the problems we face is when we raise this, I've raised this about 30 years ago at one meeting when I actually said that, because people always ask me, are Black men more violent? It's a question I usually get asked. And when I explained that there's nothing inherent in Black men that makes them any more violent, but that the effects of slavery and brutalization of slavery has left us with patterns of behavior that tend to push us to use violence. And the woman who asked me this on the floor said, "Oh, slavery, it's a long time ago. We need to forget it. Put aside making excuses for men and so on." And this is a very kind of arguments that the British is trying to put to the reparations movement. It's so long ago, time to stand on your own 2 feet, just get up and move on, is the kind of arguments they put to some of our leaders who've put forward the argument for reparations. Even going back as far as 1936, when Arthur Lewis was actually making the argument for reparations, and also so that federation, which was being discussed at the time, could succeed. Was being told that, they need to just get on with it. That was some time ago, too long ago to remember. But even that has to be challenged. Even in my personal story, I remember being hit as a child and going and complain to an old woman who lived next door that I'd be hit. And she said, and she would have been the daughter of a slave. And she said that we were lucky because not only was she beaten, she was also put to kneel on a grater, coconut grater, in the hot sun as part of our punishment. And you have to imagine, well, where do parents get this kind of a idea to treat children in such a fashion? And this is part of the problem of some of the effects of slavery and colonialism that we have to fight. There's one aspect of it. Many people in the region also, because of this the way they've internalized the racism, is they think that being dark is somehow not in their favor. Many people bleach themselves. There's so much bleaching that's going on in the Caribbean and other places. Skin bleaching, I'm talking about here. And, people need to get the information to heal from that. How do we do it? We need education is crucial in helping people there, but not only education will do it, we also need to be looking at the psychological side of things, how people can recover from this mistreatment that has gone on in the region. One of the founders of Caribbean Labor Solidarity is Richard Hart. Some of you will know about Richard, one of his books. He's written many books. And one of his books is called Slaves Who Abolished Slavery. Richard was not only a historian, he was also a solicitor, an activist, trade union activist, and has contributed in many ways. And in some ways, to me, he represents the kind of a person we will all have to become if we're going to be taking on this challenge of achieving reparations for slavery. We have to fight with what we have wherever and use our many skills. Those that we don't have, we have to acquire in some ways. We have to be able to do the calculations that Steve has done, how much money was extracted, and that kind of stuff is important. But we also need to be challenging the system when they try to put forward arguments that, well, it was too long ago, we can't remember, it was legal at the time, and so on. We need to, if we're going to win allies and get people to understand why we fight this battle, we have to take those on board as well. We have also got to become Pan-Africanists, because we also need to know what is happening in Africa. We need to know about the amazing traditions in Africa, the Enlightenment, the culture, the customs that were there. Because one of the things that we were told in the Caribbean, I don't know, for those of you who've grown up in the Caribbean, but certainly the impression you get is like, aren't we lucky? Look at those Africans, so we get that misinformation about Africans. We get to talk to hate ourselves or our ancestors. And so we need to keep educating our people about the true value of Africa and its true role in civilization. So we need to learn about that. And I hope that the role of fighting for reparations in the region will percolate down to the working class communities, to poor communities, with small groups where people can get information, get knowledge about Africa, about the sense of themselves, so that they don't feel as though they're coming out of something that is terrible. When people feel bad about themselves, they treat themselves badly. Suicide rates in the region are really horrific. In Guyana, we had one of the highest suicide rates for a short while. I think it's changed, but we're still very much up there on the top of suicide rates. So, hating ourselves and taking it out on ourselves is not something that is good. Having a sense of our history will help people to recover from the effects of slavery and colonialism. Now, we've been fortunate in this respect because we've got so many academics and scholars who've done this work. We've got a theory and we've got activists, so we need to put it into practice and actually get the information out there. Most of us, we've got to get the information about Arthur Lewis and, and read his stuff, Captain Cipriani, Fedon, Mary Shaw, and Walter Rodney, whose work, how Europe wanted to develop Africa, needs to be in our universities and needs to be in the curriculum. One of the things we are doing in the UK is actually fighting for changes in the curriculum. So, the whole decolonizing the curriculum is a movement that's there that we support. And this needs to be happening in the Caribbean as well, because as I understand it, CLR James' work are not in the universities. Some people are against teaching history in the Caribbean and other places. They're trying to get rid of history so we don't know that part of ourselves. So that's another area where we need to be fighting the Caribbean and the role that we need to play there. So for me, the whole idea of, what we're doing when we take on reparations, we're trying to change the world, we're trying to change these things, and we need to get that information. As I said, we've got it, people. I didn't mention Hilary Beckles yet because I think he deserves, an hour talking about his work. You know, if you haven't seen his book, Britain's Black Debt, and his even more mind-blowing book, in my opinion, the one which I just got recently, is called How Britain Underdeveloped Caribbean. I'll just show it and add. He didn't ask me to do to plug his book, but I tell you, it's so good. Each one of us need to be acquiring that book to see the arguments. One of the things that came out very strongly for me in it is the way the British have tried to block the whole reparations question and movement, and the way they've used the things they've done already. You know, when we think about Aristide from Haiti, who was removed from office, deposited in South Africa, he was getting very loud about speaking about reparations. And of course, the French forced Haiti to pay reparations. And we need to also be fighting for France to pay back that money to Haiti, excluding our people from communing with each other. And I think the way the British undermine the whole federation movement is something, you know, we need to be wary of, we need to be aware of, and also start to make the argument for federation again, especially in times of pandemic and climate change. Our communities will be affected deeply. We will best withstand it if we come together as a political unit to be able to challenge these difficult times that actually, you know, will meet us. Federation is a key part, I hope, at some point in the whole reparations argument, because the funds and the money that, you know, we demand that the British must pay can go a long way towards making federation a reality. Hilary Beckles touched on the issue quite a bit in his book, looking at the way the British actually pretended to be for it, but was actually undermining it and destroying it. And the other aspect that comes out in that book for me is the utter hatred, really, of the Brits towards Black people, towards Caribbean people, towards the West Indians. They are out, as Hilary said, to punish us for daring to rebel in the 30s and to have our labor revolutions, as it were. And we know they have a long history of, in some ways, attacking those that hurt them and that dare to resist, you know, whatever it is they want to do. We look at how they've behaved with the Chago Islands. You know, they've been taken to court. The court has said, you must return them, you must pay them, you know, compensation. No, the Brits haven't done any of it. The Americans behave in the same kind of fashion. They have been, with the way in which they attacked Nicaragua, they were taken to court, and the court has found that they should pay reparations to Nicaragua. They have not, and this is over 40 years, they haven't paid any, not a penny. So we see that people who have power and who have guns are not gonna concede defeat very easily or do anything to make reparations. We don't expect the battle with England, with Britain will be easy, but we have to be prepared. The more information we have, the more organized we are, the more we can win that battle. We need allies in this struggle. And the way we had Rianne speak just now is an idea of how we need to build allies in the UK. And as I said just now, we need to fight our battles wherever we are. We're in the Caribbean, we fight our battles there, and we organize, we make sure people are getting the information. Here in the UK, our role is to win allies for our struggle. Of course, one of the arguments the British will put forward is that they can't ask the taxpayer to fund us, you know, and we need to make sure that we've got the taxpayers with us, the organized trade unions and organized workers and other organizations, anti-racist groups and so on that we work with. So we've got a strong body of people who actually saying, no, you've done it wrong, you've committed a crime, and you need to pay it. So not just us fighting, but we also get other people on board. Getting white people as allies working with us, I think, is very important. We've made some moves in that direction. Steve mentioned a little bit about the work we're doing with the TUC a short while ago, and I think that is crucial work. And we will continue to build on that and work on that as our part of our role in ending this racism. Tackling racism is the big issue for us. It is racism that has informed the whole attack on the Windrush generation. We've done representation there. We continue to work to oppose that. Deportations. And, you know, and if anybody's any doubt about the racist nature of the establishment in this country, we only have to think about the war in Ukraine and the treatment of the way in which Black people were treated as trying to escape the war, as opposed to how white people were treated. We only have to look at what's happening in the English Channel in terms of, you know, we're trying to reach the UK and how they're handled and how they've been treated. We only have to look at, you know, just only yesterday, the report has come out about the way in which Black people are being denied employment. And the figures are much higher on employment for Black people. We also look at the figures that have just come out recently about the deaths caused by COVID-19, way higher for Black people than it is for white in this country. So racism is alive and well. We still have a real battle on our hands in terms of fighting it. And the more information we have, the more allies we build, the more we can combat it. Okay. I see some hands going up, so I think I better stop.
Well, thank you very much, Luke. Like all of the other speakers, we could have gone on just with your talk for hours, because it, like a flower, it generates so many petals of different issues to be discussed. Okay, just to remind you, before we continue into the questions, that our comrades in Ghana are looking for support via any second-hand laptops or computers that you have. So please contact us at CLS. Just to remind you again,